Ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa. Ki ngā te whātua, tēnā koutou. Ki ngā kaimahi, tēnā koutou. Ko rangitoto, te moanga. Ko Waitemata, te moana. Ko Berlin, me Tamaki Makaurau, te whenua tupu. He kai whakahaere mātua te puna tangata au i te kaitiaki tāhua pēnihana kaumātua o Aotearoa. Ko Mika Austin ahau. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Hello everyone. So as you've heard, I'm Mika. I'm the leader of the People and Culture function at the New Zealand Super Fund, or officially the Guardians of New Zealand Superannuation. Selena, I won't follow your amazing example of naming all of my wonderful team members by name because we've got 2 tables of them, but I would just like to acknowledge all my amazing colleagues down here who work incredibly hard on a daily basis in this space, and it's just lovely to have all of your support. So I joined the Guardians in 2012, not long after we had completed our first ever Human Synergistics Culture Survey. And I'm delighted to say that we're currently gearing up for our 20-year celebrations in a few weeks' time. So for those of you doing the maths, that means I joined the Guardians just as we were entering into that spotty, awkward, hormonal teenage phase as an organisation. And as anyone with teenagers can tell you, this can be a testing time. But before we get into that, and I have some stories to share, for those of you who may not be aware what the Super Fund actually does, I too have a little video to share with you, although I'm afraid it doesn't have quite as many delicious looking beverages and parties in ours.
Hi, I'm Joe, and I just turned 8. I love playing with my grandpa. Grandpa always has time to play with me. He says that's because he is retired and gets his super or pension payments from the government. Mum says that the taxes she and Dad pay go towards paying for Grandpa's pension. And when they retire, the government will give them a pension too. But by the time my parents and I retire, there will be a lot fewer working people for every person in retirement. With fewer working people to pay taxes, the government may need to increase taxes by a lot to continue to make pension payments to all retired New Zealanders. That's where the New Zealand Super Fund comes in. By investing wisely today, the fund is building a nest egg to help make pension payments more affordable for the government and for future taxpayers like me and my friends. Having this nest egg will help ensure we can retire and get a pension, just like Grandpa does today. New Zealand Super Fund, investing today to help meet tomorrow's retirement needs.
So we are an autonomous Crown entity, and our goal is to sustainably grow the pūtea, or the fund, as large as we possibly can to help offset the future cost of superannuation in New Zealand. So to that end, we exist to benefit every single person in this room and every single person in this country, no matter race, creed or sex. And that purpose is a strong shared tie that really binds us all. We're a long-term fund, and because we know that an effective, constructive culture leads to strong, sustainable organisational performance and both personal and professional satisfaction for our people, we have invested heavily over the last 10 plus years, as many of you are doing also, in developing and strengthening that culture. So today I'll share with you some insights into our culture survey to date, and I know the team will recognise this as well. We have been seeing a lot of common themes, a lot of common approaches, a lot of common challenges in terms of our experiences as we go through this. Many of you are very, very well advanced in your culture work and journeys. Maybe some of you are more towards the beginning. And you may hear some stories from me about what's worked in our journey, and in particular what hasn't worked, that you might like to take into account as you go through your own processes. So, as many of you will have done, we started by asking our people what was their ideal culture, and this is what they told us. A pretty common theme that many of you would have seen. Unsurprisingly, our people want a constructive work culture, and one where we support each other to achieve our goals together. You can see that for our lot, there's a little bit of red in there. We quite like a bit of oppositional and competitive in our business. Our people really value challenging ideas, testing assumptions, and engaging in robust debates. But for us, we really want to make sure that we're only valuing those interactions if they're happening in a supportive and humanistic, encouraging way. So that's the trick. So all well and good that that's what we'd like to look like, but what does our actual culture look like? So this was our most recent culture survey, taken at the beginning of last year. Now, sure, we do not have that uninterrupted sweep of blue right across the top of the wheel, but we do have a culture that is by far and away predominantly constructive and supportive of our people. However, it was not always like this. This was us in 2011, just before I joined. Much like our teenage hormones, it's fair to say things were a little bit up and down on the culture front. We thought we were great. We thought at this time that we had this culture thing nailed. We certainly did not have, back then, collective buy-in that this was something we should be spending our time on. We're an investment shop. Stop bothering us with this wishy-washy HR stuff. We're here to make money. But even for those who were bought into the idea that actually we should be doing something about cultural change, we actually really didn't know how to go about it. So what did that feel like back in 2011? We told ourselves we had a good culture, and compared to many organisations, we probably did. But in reality, the day-to-day experience for many of our people in that environment was competitive, it was very power-driven, and it was divisive. Back then, our predominant cultural styles were aggressive defensive, red, with our most dominant behaviours being oppositional and competitive. Now, don't forget, we actually like a little bit of that, but only a smidge. Those of you who have worked in these types of organisations, and the rest of you can probably imagine what that feels like, know how that sits when you go into the office every day in that sort of an environment. So we realised that we needed to do something, but honestly, we were not entirely sure what that thing was. In those early years between surveys, we had a key action. It was our most popular action selected by our leaders as a means of moving our culture along, and that was to go and have a coffee with another team on a quarterly basis. Now, don't get me wrong, I highly encourage that. It's a lovely thing to do, but it's not going to shift the dial on this sort of work. But slowly but surely enough, we started to educate ourselves and experiment, and we started to learn, and gradually, our culture started to shift towards our preferred ideal. So this is our journey. Through the years, as we've invested in this process, you can see that positive story starting to emerge. Over time, our circumplex has become less red, less green, and more blue, more constructive. Our humanistic encouraging assessment in particular has skyrocketed. And after a bit of a false start in the early days, This has been the result of enterprise-wide effort and active choices to make meaningful organisational change. However, we certainly have not always got it right. We have tried some things and failed. We also tried a lot of other things, many of which have been mentioned by many of you today in terms of programs and systems and support that worked incredibly well. But we're still refining and iterating and experimenting and seeking to maximise those constructive outcomes and optimise our performance. In terms of lessons learned along the way, as you can imagine, there are literally hundreds to pick from, but we'll talk about a few, some of which haven't been covered by the rest of you because you've been focusing on much more successful approaches. Number one, you can't tell people how they should feel. Telling your people that you have a great culture does not make it so, it turns out. And so when we all complete that survey and that mirror is held up to us as leaders, it takes a lot of humility, and we've seen a lot of that on the stage today, to accept what we're being told and to understand what our people are telling us that they're experiencing. In our teams, we did not get that right. So these were our first two surveys. And around this time, we did some very unhelpful things to ourselves. We had some teams electing to share their culture results with each other, not with a view to offering support or trading ideas for improvement, but to judge who was the best. What better way to address that pesky red competitive component, right? We found staff started to use the language of, I'm going to give you some constructive feedback, which was usually a signal that they were about to deliver some pretty harsh messages in a very much unconstructive way. We told each other repeatedly to be more blue. What does that even mean? We certainly didn't know at the time. Kind of reminds me actually of Melania, be best. What do I do with that? And truthfully, as leaders, we didn't always react well to the challenging messages our people were trying to give us. So while we obviously did see some improvement in our constructive styles, we had a massive swing into the green, passive defensive behaviours. Not exactly what we were hoping for. So it was time for a reset. I'm embarrassed to say this took us a few goes and a number of years to learn this, but we finally realised that we needed to really deeply understand the how culture works model. Instead of focusing on the outputs, which of course I've just done, we actually needed to focus on the inputs in order to understand how to effect meaningful change. We had to use the data and really examine how we could sweat those causal factors to our advantage. Put simply, we had to change the conversation and actually grow up. So we did a whole lot of things. We refreshed our values through storytelling, asking all of our staff to tell us a time that they felt proud to work for the Guardians and a time when they didn't. From those stories, we distilled core values, which happily and coincidentally, it turned out, actually mapped across to the 4 constructive behavioural styles. We developed a new purpose and vision and strategic goals underpinned by those new staff-curated values. We changed our incentive structure to link satisfactory how performance with bonus eligibility. For an investment shop, that was a startling notion at the time. We did away with the concept of individual high-performing talent stars, overhauling our training and development opportunities to ensure that they were available to all of our staff with a no employees left behind approach. We had multiple elephant in the room discussions to ensure that we were raising and addressing key issues. And we delve deep into risk matters to better understand and challenge our own behaviour in response to risk opportunities and threats. Now, don't get me wrong, there were still plenty of missteps. One year we asked all of our teams to come and present to everyone else on their team results, to share stories and gain collective buy-in across the business. And before we knew it, the employee grapevine had translated that into HR is making us do a skit. So you can guess how that went down with the masses. But overall, we started to improve. For our first 4 culture surveys, and again, I'm sure many of you are rolling your eyes, the entire program was HR-led. Through time, though, we have devolved that responsibility and created a guiding coalition of leaders across the business, investing in training them again and again and again, because that's what you have to do, to themselves lead and actively support the culture work. In addition to training on the OCI and OEI models, all of our leaders and in fact all of our staff undertake the LSI and bespoke self-leadership programs in order to develop both their behavioural vocabulary and to raise awareness of how all of our behaviour impacts on others. For us, as we added new people and others moved on, we had to continually refresh the culture for those people who will be the guardians of our future and actually the guardians of your future. We came to learn that so much of our success in the culture space was contingent upon fair, transparent, and well understood policies, practices, systems and structures that allowed people to see and understand how decisions were made and how they fed into their employee experience. We established a talent team which emphasises transparent processes focused on fairness and selection. We talked to every single employee at recruitment stage about culture and ensure that we have a good match and that we are setting expectations before people even get in the door. We developed a people framework for measuring performance and linking the language of our performance metrics back to specific concepts in the survey. One year we realised that our goal-setting cluster of scores was lower than optimal, so we developed a mini campaign, and don't get me wrong, by campaign I mean just a couple of emails, to remind leaders of the importance of joint goal setting, ensuring that they had the tools available to set SMART goals with their team members. And this simple step, clearly communicated, linked back to what we were aiming to achieve, and our culture outcomes produced results immediately. So sometimes it actually can be quite small things that make a difference. Sow the seeds of culture through everything. Selena talked about this too. We've all heard culture eats strategy for breakfast, but culture also supports the implementation of strategy. Every project we have is impacted by our culture, whether it's a system we're implementing, a risk we're managing, a change we're making in our pursuit of continuous improvement, or an investment that we're adding to the portfolio. The quality of the decisions that we make is based on the quality of our culture. Now, we've done a lot of work on this in similar ways to a number of our other speakers in terms of our systems and processes, but to be honest, we do have more to do here in terms of our actual conversations with each other. Remind your leaders, what will the cultural impact of this proposal that you're making be? Ask them to explain the impact of their ideas in terms of OCI and OEI concepts. Use the language of the circumplex and the causal factors in your day-to-day meetings. How will this change facilitate growth of our constructive cultural styles and minimise our passive defensive and aggressive defensive styles? Exercise that muscle until using it becomes second nature for all of your leaders. Now, we've spent all day talking about the big C word, culture. But of course, another C word dominated all of our lives globally between 2020 and 2022. By dint of a happy accident, we just happened to close our 2020 culture survey exactly 2 weeks before the first lockdown in New Zealand. What a canny little piece of data for us. Now, plainly, all of our ways of working fundamentally shifted during those 2 years that followed. At the Guardians, 30% of our workforce joined us in that 2-year period, many remotely. So even maintaining the culture that we had pre-COVID would have required significant effort. And we then tested again 2 years later in February 2022, try saying that quickly, 2 months after the country converted to the traffic light system. And I can assure you, through that 2-year period, there was much hand-wringing about the negative impact COVID surely was having on our culture. So how did we fare? Pre-COVID on the right, post-COVID on the left. Even with the challenges of the COVID years, we not only maintained the culture that we already had, but we actually managed to improve it remotely. We were able to lean on those strong foundations that we had already built together and then to reinforce them during that period, connecting personally with each of our staff members, as I'm sure many of you did as well, and committing deliberate leadership to the behaviours that were aligned to our cultural expectations. I could go on with many, many more lessons, but let's finish with a fun one. Make some noise. This is really important work to be done, but if you can, have fun with it. Emphasise early in your surveys the importance of hearing your employee voices. One of the things that I'm really proud of is that we have only had one survey where we haven't had 100% of staff completing the survey. And that one time we only had 2 people who didn't do it, and one of them was on parental leave. So we actually can really rely on that because everybody's had a say. Use your data during the survey period and chase up your teams. This is one area where actually a tiny bit of competitiveness is quite helpful. Think about ways of bringing people together to create a buzz around a launch, and have a loud launch when you start your surveys, whether it be a coffee card for folk to caffeinate up before they complete the survey, an enterprise-wide calendar invite for everyone to fill it in together, Zoom and team backgrounds where you change the colour to represent different parts of the circumplex, board games in the lunchroom that might require different behavioural styles in order to win. The list goes on. Be creative and have fun with it, and bring your team members in to contribute ideas. And once you have your data, celebrate your successes, and don't forget to continue with what's working well. We go straight to what do we need to fix. Actually, remember all the good stuff too. The more data you can source from your people, the more your teams will see themselves reflected in the outputs, and the more legitimate the work that you do off the back of that will be. Talk about it again, and talk about it some more. So for us, this is our 2011 to 2022 story. When we stand back and look at our progress over a decade, we can see that improvement in culture is incremental. It takes huge effort and focus from everyone, but it can absolutely be achieved, even when you make as many mistakes as we did. It truly is a marathon, not a sprint. So what does the future hold for us? Like you all, we are living in a world of constant, relentless change. We are about to get a new CEO. Our primary stakeholder, the Government of New Zealand, has just changed. Our organisation has grown by a further 20% since the last time we measured our culture, and we are now apparently a mature organisation through that awkward teenage phase. We will be running the OCI and OEI surveys again in February next year, and we can't wait to see how far we've come, where we have more work to do, where we might have slipped, and what opportunities await us as we roll into 2024. So watch this space. Kia ora.